Hello and welcome to the Spin Room. I'm Eylon Levy. Today we have a special guest joining us from New Delhi, capital of India. Dr. Subramanian Swamy sits in the upper house of the Indian Parliament and is a member of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party. He has been an outspoken supporter of strengthening the relationship between India and Israel. Welcome, sir, to the Spin Room. On our agenda, two topics. One, we'll take stock of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to India. Next, we'll re-examine India's position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and its role in the broader region. Dr. Swamy, welcome to the Spin Room. First up, Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit to India. One glorified photo opportunity, or is this visit going to meaningfully change Israel-India relations?
Well, the most outstanding feature of Netanyahu's visit to India is the emotional churning that has taken place in India, which we have never, ever before witnessed for any other world leader. And this shows the depth of feeling that the Indians have for Israel.
I mean, is this purely a sentimental attachment, or is there a sense that as a result of this visit, ties are going to be deepened in economic, in military and diplomatic terms, in meaningful, tangible ways?
Well, first of all, this is an emotional upsurge because we Indians know that even when we didn't have diplomatic relations, the Israelis were helping us in difficult times like a war with Pakistan. They were enabling us to get spares for those equipments which we could not get from the world market. And they were helpful throughout. And then the second is the admiration that you have converted a desert land into a blooming agricultural land, and your dairy farming and your ability. Third point is that the ability, despite being surrounded by ferocious elements, you have shown them their place and you have secured your country. So that admiration is the emotional part. Then the second thing is, as far as deals that struck, those are, well, I mean, those are not the ones that are receiving the attention, because whether if we didn't even strike one single deal, we would still think this is a memorable visit and a visit that we all look forward to.
Dr. Swamy, help me understand something. India is a nation of 1.3 billion people. Israel has barely 8.5 million. That's a statistical error in Indian terms. Why is Israel so important for India? What does India actually need from this tiny country?
Well, we have seen that your brain power has provided us information on terror, for example, which nobody else has provided. It has shown what leveraging means in the world politics. You have shown that despite your being in small numbers compared to India, you have tremendous influence internationally. And so,
Dr. Swamy, very kind words for Israel, but India recently cancelled a $500 million contract for anti-tank missiles because your defense ministry wants to build its own technology. I mean, does that suggest that India thinks it can go it alone and it doesn't really need Israel for this cooperation?
Well, that's not personal to Israel. We may have cancelled it. This must have been an opinion of people who think that we can do. We have the same problem with the F-16 from the United States. We have a light combat aircraft of our own, which we have produced indigenously, which we think is superior to F-16. That doesn't, you know, that's not a reflection. And if indeed you measure our relations on the kind of economic deals that we make, I don't think that's really understanding the depth of the Indo-Israel relations.
Okay, Dr. Swamy, stay with us. We're going away for a very short break. We will be back in just 1 minute with the Spin Room with our representative from India. We'll be back in just a minute.
Americans have simply lost trust in news media.
What happened to the news? All I get is a daily serving of lies.
Do your job and just tell me the news. I am overloaded with news that is useless.
Give me the facts. Let me sort it. Where's the integrity?
Why is the news so biased? I will never trust the media.
I-24 News.
Unflinching, opinionated. Weeknights, David Schuster and Shayna Estulin bring you analysis, interviews, and opinions that connect us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to the Spin Room. We're joined by Dr. Subramanian Swamy, a member of India's upper house for the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party. Dr. Swamy, India and Israel have a budding romance, but India voted against President Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital at the United Nations just last month. Does India want a strategic relationship with Israel, or is this just business?
Well, people like me were outspoken in condemning that decision of the government of India, but it was explained to us that we have many pending projects with many of the Arab countries, and this was not a vote for Israel. It was actually an American resolution, anti-American resolution. The Americans had taken a decision unilaterally to do what previous American administrations didn't do. Therefore, it's a vote essentially to show that we are not junior partners of the Americans.
Yeah, all the same, in the past, the traditional position of Indian diplomacy has been to vote automatically for the Palestinian side. Is there a sense that actually this budding bilateral relationship is going to shift to Indian support for Israel in multilateral arenas?
Well, I wouldn't measure our relations with Israel on the basis of vote in the UN.
Well, why not? This is very important for Israel, condemnations of the UN.
We are a new party which has come to absolute power, absolute majority after a very long time of Congress rule. And to turn it around and make the bureaucracy fall in line, all this is going to take a little time. But the fundamentals are clear, that the Prime Minister went to Israel without hyphenating his visit with the Palestinians. He did not go to Palestine, or whatever it's called, Palestinian Authority. And he has had an Israeli Prime Minister come here and go by as a kind of a world hero from
Okay, well, Dr. Swamy, I want to pick you up especially on this point, because we're moving to our second topic, India's position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the broader region. You notice correctly that Mr. Modi did not visit the Palestinians when he came to visit Israel, but reports he is indeed planning to visit Ramallah in February. What should Mr. Modi tell Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas when he meets him in Ramallah?
Well, you should say to, we have said this to the Iranians, and we are going to say it to the Palestinians also, that nobody can destruct Israel. Israel is a member of the United Nations, and India recognized Israel even though we didn't have diplomatic relations for a long time. We recognized Israel when it was founded. And yes, people like me would say that yes, Israel these Jews needed a homeland after what they went through. Of course, not in India, perhaps the only place in the world they didn't have any persecution was India. But the Jews needed a homeland. But the Palestinians...
is that something Mr. Modi is going to tell Mr. Abbas?
He would certainly tell them that we would support the integrity of Israel.
Okay, well, I mean, the peace process is breaking down now. The Palestinians saying that they won't accept the United States as a mediator. Do you see a role, perhaps, for India to step in the void and help meaningful peace efforts on the ground?
I would oppose that as a parliamentarian. that we play any mediatory role. If the Palestinians want a homeland, they should go to Jordan.
Okay, certainly an unusual position, and that would be a major shift in Indian foreign policy. Another shift that you've proposed, you've suggested that India should move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Why would such a major policy shift be in India's national interest?
Well, first of all, moving to West Jerusalem is permitted even in the UN scheme of things, because that is being recognized as under Israeli jurisdiction. So Jerusalem is an ancient city. There's no doubt about that. We people are talking about our ancient connections, our ancient culture, ancient symbols. So how can we object to the Israelis sticking to Jerusalem as their ancient city?
I mean, the international community position would be that Jerusalem as a whole is a final status issue, and they don't actually recognize West Jerusalem as Israel's capital. But your position, if a nation has a deep attachment to its ancestral homeland, it should pursue that despite condemnations from the international community?
Well, international condemnations took place when we liberated and created, divided Pakistan and created Bangladesh. And the voting was 114 to 11. But still, we went on with it. I don't think we should really bother about it. It's a fact that the Israelis are a democracy. Israel is a democracy in a sea of dictatorships. And it's been a friend of India. And this process of changing our policy from the past to the future that I foresee has to be gradually. It cannot be radically shifted. We can't change positions too fast because we have to carry people with us, particularly in our bureaucracy.
Dr. Swamy, one reform you've proposed, you've said that India and Israel should sign a military mutual assistance treaty. What do you mean by that?
Right. I mean by that we have a comparative advantage in manpower. You have a comparative advantage in intelligence, that is military and political intelligence about terror, and you have sophisticated weapons which nobody else produces. So we have a comparative advantage. We should guarantee that if Israel ever needs Indian army to protect it, we should be available. We should sign an agreement that we will intervene to supply Indian troops to protect Israel. And in Israel, in return, should help us, and also with the United States, it has considerable influence to see that we get the most modern weaponry to defend ourselves.
I mean, this is a very dramatic proposal, so I just want to make sure we understand exactly what you're proposing. Are you saying that India and Israel should establish a kind of bilateral NATO for common defense, whereby if India were attacked by Pakistan, Israel would be legally obligated to come to India's defense and vice versa?
Precisely.
So you would be willing to send Indian troops to protect Israel?
I would also welcome the... Yes. If the Israelis ever feel short of manpower, we should provide that.
Okay, well, in the context of that, India and Israel are friends, but India also has friendly relations with Iran. Now, Israel is lobbying the international community to fix the Iran deal or cancel it. Your position, is the Iran deal beneficial for India or a threat to it?
Oh, I don't think we want to think about it. You have very good relations with China, and China has very good relations with Israel.
But all the same, nobody is proposing establishing a mutual defense pact between Israel and China. You're suggesting something that would seem to jeopardize India's relations with another friendly country to you.
Well, I mean, Iran, if it threatens Israel, we will definitely come on the side of Israel. But we can have bilateral relations with both Israel and Iran. Iran is Shia, and we have lots of problems with Sunnis in our country. And Iran borders Pakistan, and there are strategic advantages of it. But there are limits to that. We certainly will not support any action of Iran against Israel.
And indeed, as you say, you think that India should legally obligate itself to come to Israel's support if attacked by Iran or its proxies.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's right. That's the ultimate development.
Okay. Dr. Subramanian Swamy, member of India's Upper House, representative of the Bharatiya Janata Party, thank you very much for joining us from New Delhi. We are going away for a very short break. When we come back, we'll be joined by our correspondents for a deeper dive.
Our world is becoming increasingly connected. 6.5 million Wi-Fi enabled devices are now shipping every day. And global consumer internet traffic is growing exponentially, with 2.8 billion internet users consuming video at a breathtaking rate. We are creating personalized mobile entertainment and communications breakthroughs that are connecting millions of people and billions of devices around the globe. We are Eris, and we're powering your digital world.
I'm David Schuster on I-24 News. Join us on Stateside. It's our channel's flagship broadcast, and it features our best reporting and analysis of news from around the world and from here in the United States.
Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Emisión especial, Nisman tenía razón. A 3 años de la muerte y asesinato del fiscal Alberto Nisman, tendremos entrevistas exclusivas, documentos nunca antes revelados y Damián Pachter, un mensaje para la expresidenta Cristina Kirchner. El 19 de enero en News 24, el magazine semanal en español de I-24 News.
In the Holy Land, there are wonders most people never get to see. I-24 News will take you inside the shadows and unravel the secrets of some of the world's most revered sites in a way you've never experienced. All access from every angle. Tune in to Sacred Sites 360, Sunday 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
Welcome back to the Spin Room. In the last block, we heard from Indian Member of Parliament Subramanian Swamy, who argued for strengthening the ties between India and Israel. Here in the studio now, we have our diplomatic correspondent, Eli Hochenberg, and our international affairs correspondent, Bianca Zanini. Welcome both to the studio. Quite a dramatic announcement we heard from this Member of Parliament in India, suggesting that India and Israel should establish a mutual defense pact along the lines of a bilateral NATO, so that Israel should come to India's defense if attacked by Pakistan, and India would come to Israel's defense if attacked by Lebanon, Syria, any of its neighboring countries. I mean, is this a serious proposal or pie in the sky?
Well,
Ellie?
Technically speaking, I think geography will beg to differ, but we are talking about...
NATO spans across the sea as well.
That's true. That's true. And the Indian army is consists of about 1 million soldiers, if I'm not mistaken. So Israel will be very happy. And India, too, with the Israeli innovative approach, if you will, to security infrastructures, etc. And this is obviously a main topic in Netanyahu's trip. He managed to put the big spike deal back on the table, and this is without a doubt a huge success in this respect. And Israeli technology, security-related technology, is very much relevant to India. Just think about the recent headlines here with Israel targeting a Hamas tunnel, very similar condition along the India-Pakistan border. So it's not far-fetched, this notion of cooperating even further on the security level.
But really, Bianca, it's more realistic that the two countries are going to cooperate on defense technology rather than actually legally obligating themselves to come to each other's defense.
Yes, I mean, he was definitely very, very focused on the sentimental values as well, and on this connection that Israel has with India. He even said that we shouldn't value the relationship based on UN votes, which of course is something that maybe Netanyahu would beg to differ. But one of the main points was, and he said this, that it's going to take time to translate this relationship. We can clearly see right there are hugs, they have a strong connection, and to see this translate into de facto changes like UN votes in diplomacy.
Despite this romantic walk on the beach.
Exactly.
Ellie, look, India, a democracy, but all the same, the Prime Minister has a certain level of control over his diplomats. Why can he not order them from now? We take Israel's side at the UN.
Because it's unfortunately, it's more complicated than that. There's a net of obligations. You use this term, and I will address it soon again. And it's not that easy to dismiss altogether the diplomatic ties India has with either
why does this take time?
movement, or because it has business with other nations that perhaps will not be happy to see India voting alongside Israel. But you've seen Netanyahu's reaction, and this is what he said both behind closed doors in briefings and on camera. This process takes time, and we're not worried. But you did use the word obligation, and you know, from conversation I had with officials both on the Jerusalem and on the other side, they said that the relationship we are seeing in the past couple of years between Israel and India is perhaps unique in this respect, because usually you have two countries and they sit together and think, what can I give you and what can I get in return? And in the case of Israel and India, the notion is different. It's how we can do things together. So it's, you know, maybe a more meditative a sense of diplomacy here, but many diplomats have told me that this is very much present in all the communications between officials in Delhi and in Jerusalem.
Well, Bianca, help me understand this point exactly, because, you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu predicts that because other countries need Israel's business and technology, soon they'll start voting differently at the United Nations. But if the Prime Minister is going to lead a country, going to lead a delegation of 130 trade officials to a country that still votes against Israel, I mean, what reason do they have to change their vote if Israel's going to give them all the economic benefits without a change in their diplomacy?
Well, he said himself, the Prime Minister, that this could take up to 10 years. It's not something that's going to change overnight. And Prime Minister Modi has declared now that he's, during Netanyahu's visit in India, that he's going to visit Ramallah in the beginning of February. I think it's February 10th. And it's clearly to send a message not just to the Palestinians, not just to the Israelis, but to the Arab world as well, that they're not taking sides, that they're saying, okay, we have this flourishing relationship, we're going to nurture this, we have a lot of common interests, cybersecurity, tech, fighting terrorism, but at the same time, on the issues of the Palestinians, we're going to keep that separate. India is dependent on the Middle East for about 60% of their gas, and there are about 7 million Indians who work in the Persian Gulf who send back millions to the families back home. There's also the friendship aspect that India has with the Arab nations and the Muslims at home inside of India. So a third reason why we won't see this.
An attitude from this member of parliament saying we have problems with our own Sunni Muslims at home, a figure who hasn't been known as being particularly friendly to the domestic Muslim population.
So they don't want to make this worse. And then a third reason, and this is important too, India does have in their eyesight a permanent seat at the UN Security Council. This is something that they are going to
Israel's
want.
also bidding for its own seat, not a permanent one.
Perhaps of India is a bit more relevant, yeah.
And this would require a 2/3 majority in the General Assembly, so they have to make sure to play everything just right, which is also why they're announcing this visit to Ramallah now.
Ellie, help me understand something. Look, on the question of Iran, India has relations with Iran, briefly, has relations with Iran, but also wants to be friendly with Israel. I mean, at some point, is it going to have to choose sides, or can it continue this balancing act?
Iran, the Palestinians are topics that Israel has to deal with on a daily basis vis-a-vis most of its allies, let it be in Western Europe or elsewhere. In this relationship, neither the Palestinians nor Iran are topping the agenda, and this is perhaps the most substantial change, to change the discourse, not to keep on talking about the same topics, but rather create a new agenda. Netanyahu has been there for 5 days now, soon to be over, and it was just simply irrelevant. And this is the big news. Netanyahu managed to carry out an extremely successful diplomatic trip without neither Iran nor the Palestinians hovering above.
What a welcome relief for the Prime Minister. We have to go for a break now. Bianca Zanini, Eli Hohenberg, thank you very much for your post-interview analysis. We're taking a break now. Coming up, spin room press guru Emily Rose will be here with Israeli and Palestinian newspapers for a look on how they're spinning the same events.
I'm Khaled bin David.
And I'm Nareet Ben.
Join us on The Rundown here in the heart of the Middle East for a candid conversation.
A closer look at the stories born out of this region and driving changes all the way to Washington.
Strictly Security. Your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts. Analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays, 8:05 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News. This week on Holy Land Uncovered, a special interview with Israeli Minister of Agriculture Uri Ariel following his initiative to break the long drought in the country with massive prayer. Also, we'll take a tour in the Arab village of Shfar'am, and we'll see a new exhibition which tackles life in the ultra-Orthodox cult, Lev Tahor. Join us Sunday, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to the Spin Room. Our press guru Emily Rose is here with an inside look at Israeli and Palestinian papers to see how they're putting a different spin on the same world events. Emily, welcome.
Thank you.
We've just been talking for the first half of the show about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to India, presumably making headlines in Israel. What are they saying?
Absolutely. Well, I have to say that this visit to India has been great optics for Netanyahu. We can see all across the Hebrew media that he's really boosted his image. And we last left our hero last week. He was taking off in a cloud of controversy surrounding his son, Yair Netanyahu, and a leaked video or a leaked recording of his son outside a strip club. But as he landed, we saw that these...
Without his son.
Without his son, we saw that the so-called bromance between him and Prime Minister Modi, Indian Prime Minister Modi, has really taken off. And
is Modi showing him here cherry tomatoes? The Prime Minister likes to talk about Israel's cherry tomatoes.
Don't we all love to talk about cherry tomatoes? And the wonderful thing here, this is actually a photo from Gujarat, Modi's hometown. And we saw that Netanyahu was greeted with cheers, reports of Hebrew signs, Hebrew music, Hebrew dancing. Director General of the Foreign Ministry, the Israeli Foreign Ministry, Val Rotem, said he had never seen a greeting so warm. So we really saw that Netanyahu was greeted with open arms. And this couldn't have been a better image for
Emily,
Netanyahu.
let's look at the spin about this, because when Prime Minister Netanyahu is in Israel, the Hebrew press, really his sharpest critics, they give him no relief with one corruption scandal after the next. But as soon as he goes abroad and he's talking to a foreign audience, it's King Bibi. It's Netanyahu speaking on behalf of the country.
Yes, and the juxtaposition is stark. We saw Netanyahu in Australia this year and in Argentina. He's really been making his world tour. There were even articles that mentioned him as welcomed as a quote-unquote rock star.
A rock star? Gosh, I guess the Palestinians aren't welcoming him as a rock star. What are they saying?
Well, I have to show you that in the Palestinian Palestinian story tells us very, very differently. Here in the flagship Ma'an Palestinian news agency, we can see that this visit was covered with demonstrations against Netanyahu. It mentioned demonstrations popping up all over India, particularly outside the Israeli embassy. It made mention, great mention, of the arms deals going on between India and Israel. We know that a lot of these protests were organized by the Indian National Congress Party, which is the party of Gandhi.
The left-wing party to the right-wing BJP.
That's exactly right. It was a leftist organizations, also a lot of civil disobedience organizations. They said they were standing for freedom, signs that said "Bibi go home, no Bibi here." Very anti-Netanyahu.
Very different optics. I mean, what's interesting here from a press angle is neither of these angles are necessarily untrue. They could both be true, but yet they're looking at it from completely different angles, whether they want to see the visit through a positive light or a negative light.
Absolutely. And I wonder to myself, is it better optics in the Arabic press if Netanyahu is seen as being friends with India, or do they want to portray India as somewhere that really doesn't accept Netanyahu? So it's all about this kind of internal
let's move on.
contradiction.
Overnight we had Israeli raids in Jenin. What happened there?
That's right. So here in Israel, the media has been focused on the past week for a manhunt in the West Bank regarding the murder of Rabbi Raziel Sheva, who was murdered in Jenin, in the northern Chavat Gilad, which is northern area of the West Bank. The IDF security forces have been on the hunt for any cell that's connected with the planning of this attack. And last night, in fact, we saw raids. We saw the murder of an individual who was initially suspected of committing that attack or being involved in planning that.
The individual?
Well, he was suspected of being involved in a cell that planned that attack. Okay, now there was a bit of confusion in the media initially. Initially, the Arabic media and the Hebrew media reported that the murdered individual was a 22-year-old Palestinian, and later this morning we received a correction from the Palestinian Health Ministry that it was actually a 32-year-old individual.
And interestingly here, when they talk about the assassination of a man, they're not talking about the original terror attack. They regard this Israeli counter-terror, what the Israeli media sees as a counter-terror operation, as an assassination of the suspect.
That's exactly right. And a few things that I just have to highlight here. Initially, in the Hebrew media, what you saw was Lieberman, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman, coming out this morning and saying that the mission was completely successful, and the lead already had the fact that 2 Israeli soldiers were injured in this operation, one very severely. So the real emphasis was on the Israeli soldiers being injured in the operation. If we looked over at the Palestinian press, what we saw was that 6 Palestinians were wounded. We saw that 1 Palestinian was, in fact, killed, while the Hebrew media used the clean term, neutralized.
Such a euphemism.
Such a euphemism. And in the Palestinian media, we saw that those who died were depicted and used the term literally in Arabic, martyrs. The other thing, Shahidi. And the other thing that we saw in the Palestinian media that was a stark contrast was that there was almost no mention or zero mention in most of the articles of the event in Chavat Gilad, meaning they didn't mention the attack on the rabbi.
Interesting. They view this as unprovoked Israeli aggression. Emily, let's move on to another story the Palestinians also see as Israeli aggression. We have the story of 16-year-old Ahed Tamimi, who was filmed slapping an Israeli soldier. Recently, an Israeli court denied her bail. She's been charged with assault. What are the media angles here?
So this was an absolute war of optics, and there was vitriolic rhetoric on either side. This really, for me, summed up and brought to the surface the fault lines of the conflict in the media between Palestinians and Israelis. Ahed Tamimi was depicted across the Arabic press, as I'm sure you know, as a kind of Joan of Arc figure. She was depicted as a hero standing up to the occupation forces. There were cartoons showing her as an almost, ironically, Wonder Woman. She was fighting for the freedom of Jerusalem.
Ironic because Wonder Woman is played by an Israeli woman.
That's exactly why it's ironic. And here we saw this week that actually she will remain in detention until the proceedings of her court trial are finished, meaning she won't be let free on bail. And that was the big news of her case for this week. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about how that's depicted, because Israelis, the way that soldier who reacted in that situation was depicted in Israel, he was depicted as kind of a soldier with his hands tied. Even in Hebrew, the term impotent was used, meaning he had...
Because he didn't react. She was slapping him and he didn't rise to the provocation.
That's right. He had nowhere to go. He was almost damned if he did and damned if he didn't. And that's how Israelis kind of saw this soldier who was had his hands tied behind his back. But if we looked at the Arabic press, obviously we saw a hero standing up to the occupation. It really showed the position Israel was in, painted into a corner. And I think this cartoon in the UK-based Al-Quds Al-Arabi really sums it up. There's a kind of ironic internal anagnosis, like a self-realization in this picture here.
Hitting him with emojis.
They're hitting him with emojis, and it says the era of resistance in the modern age. Now, if you notice, that's an Israeli soldier making off with Jerusalem. He's kind of stealing Jerusalem in a heist. And who's filming him? Lots and lots and lots of hands. And we remember that the only reason Ahed Tamimi's case even got famous is because the video of her slapping the soldier went viral.
Which is why her mother was charged with incitement for live streaming this video of her slapping the soldier.
Absolutely that. And all of the cases against her might not even hold water if we hadn't caught the whole thing on tape. So ironically, there's kind of an internal irony of this cartoon that I really appreciate, that they're saying you can't get away, Israel can't get away with anything now, we're watching you, but on the other hand, the crimes are also being watched.
Operating in a whole new environment. Emily Rose, press guru, thank you very much. We're taking a break. We'll be back soon with Outside News with our senior international affairs correspondent Owen Altman with the big stories that failed to make world headlines. We'll be back.
I'm David Schuster.
And I'm Shayna Estulin.
Join us on I-24 News for our show Crossroads.
We bring you a comprehensive
and engaging
look at the global news and opinions from the crossroads of America.
Weeknights beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Tracy Alexander for I-24 News. Join us on Perspectives and get the whole picture as we break down the day's top stories from all angles.
I'm Michelle McCory on I-24 News. Join me on Clear Cut, where we cut to the chase with a straightforward yet insightful breakdown of the world's top political and economic stories.
Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I'm Emily Francis on I-24 News. Join us on Trending right here on the show that shines the light on the many amazing people doing positive work to inspire. This is the show about building bridges.
Weekdays at 8 a.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown every Monday through Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to the Spin Room. We're back with Outside News. Our senior international affairs correspondent Owen Altman is here with some of the big stories this week that failed to make world headlines. Owen, a jail sentence for a Lebanese journalist who criticized Lebanon. What happened there?
Right, Eylon, a story that's starting to get some more attention on Facebook and Twitter in the last few hours. But here's what happened. Hanin Gadar, a known Lebanese journalist, lived in the country, born in the country, lived in the country for many, many years, ran a website called Now Lebanon. She herself is Shia, but she's very, very critical of Hezbollah. In 2014, she gives a speech at a conference in Washington. There we see her picture on the screen. She gave a speech at a conference in Washington, critical of the Lebanese army, critical of Hezbollah. And then after a couple of years later, goes and then moves to Washington permanently and works at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and is a fellow there. Now, just a few days ago, a military court in Lebanon, a military court sentenced her to 6 months imprisonment because of those comments she made back.
Even though she's a civilian, the military court still took jurisdiction over her.
That's right. Even though she's a civilian, even though this country's not under a state of war, a lot of criticism of this decision and of the process. But before we get there, let's take a look at what Gadar said at that conference in 2014.
Obviously, I'm coming from Lebanon, so I cannot but talk about Hezbollah's involvement in Syria and how this is affecting Lebanon and the region as a whole. Hezbollah now is Iran's regional militia, along with Iraqi fighters and groups. They are fighting Iran's regional war for dominance, and that's their main mission now. This is Hezbollah's new mission. And their main enemy is the Sunni.
Owen, maybe we didn't broadcast the full clip here because I don't understand what was so controversial there.
Right. There's a much longer clip, and there are parts of it in which she takes aim at the army, allegedly, and at Hezbollah, of course, a group that, as we all know, is so powerful in Lebanon. In any event, the military court, not impressed by what she had to say and giving her 6 months imprisonment. Obviously, a lot of anger among a lot of sectors in Lebanon, both over the process, as we mentioned before, the fact that a military court gave down this verdict, and also the fact alone that, of course, it's a limitation on freedom of expression. This was someone expressing her own views, again, outside the country even.
I mean,
and
we
yet
wouldn't be surprised if this was Saudi Arabia. I mean, there they flog bloggers, but Lebanon is meant to be, at least, one of the more liberal and open Arab states.
That's right, but as we see, it has its limits. Just to get a flavor of the criticism that's being leveled on Facebook and on Twitter, here's someone who describes himself as a researcher on Lebanon for Human Rights Watch. This is what he had to say about the verdict, and we're seeing this, Eylon, from a number of other NGOs in Lebanon and abroad. The International Federation of Journalists in the last few hours going on to Twitter, criticizing what happened, or at least noting it. And so again, this is starting to get some more attention, but again, I think what also has to be seen as a very, very troubling story of press freedom here in the Middle East.
Well, she's outside Lebanon right now, so she's probably not going to be jailed unless she actually goes back to Lebanon. Certainly a disturbing development on Israel's northern border. Owen, your next item, we've seen protests in South Africa over an advertisement from H&M that was seen to be racist, but what else has been provoking a protest in South Africa?
Well, Eylon, this time it's about education and about language and education. A school just outside Johannesburg teaches its students in Afrikaans, and a number of about 55 students...
Which is the language of the white minority.
Exactly, the language that has historically been that of the white minority, although we should say a lot of mixed-race South Africans speak the language, and to the northwest in Namibia, a number of people of many different races speak the language, but in South Africa, you're right, it's identified with the white minority and what's called in South Africa the colored minority. So this school teaches in Afrikaans outside of Johannesburg, and 55 students wanted to attend the school and be taught in English. The school said no, they didn't have capacity. The students took the case to the court. The court ruled in favor of the school. The result, we're seeing on our screen right now, protests outside the school that have turned violent over the past few days, led by supporters of the ruling African National Congress Party and also the Economic Freedom Fighters Party. Very, very emotional issue, as we can see, because again, Eylon, it's not just about language. There's an undertone of race, and that goes at South Africa's entire history.
Of course, Afrikaans being the language of apartheid. But I mean, Owen, do these violent protests suggest to us that, 24 years after the end of apartheid, South Africa hasn't managed to put the ethnic genie back in the bottle, so to speak?
Well, that's what some would say. Again, it has to be said the country has made a lot of progress in terms of overcoming its racial past. Of course, a lot of challenges in terms of governance, in particular, safety and security, the economy. And again, we've seen that over the past few years with the trial of Jacob Zuma and his political tribulations. But again, this shows that the racial issue alone hasn't gone away. Again, so ingrained in the history of this country, and it's such a difficult thing to overcome. And we see the results.
Okay, well, Owen, talking about news stories that don't make world headlines, Africa, a continent that doesn't often enter the global radar, you have another story for us from a country the size of Iran that doesn't make headlines nearly as much as Iran itself.
And a country whose area alone, I think, is the size of Western Europe. That's the Democratic Republic of the Congo. You look at a map of Africa,
Democratic
you can't
in
miss
quotation
it.
Marks.
Well, as it's been said, there was an article in the Foreign Affairs magazine recently about the country. It said it's sort of like the Holy Roman Empire.
Neither holy nor Roman nor an empire.
Neither democratic, neither a republic, nor neither in control of the entire Congo River.
Ouch.
So again, this country, again, as you mentioned, 78 million people right in the heart of Africa, a country with a very troubled past, of course, governed by the Belgians for many, many years during the period of colonialism. After colonialism, lived under the dictator Mobutu Sese Seko. Again, many people would argue, mismanaged the country, a country that's potentially very, very rich, has a lot of minerals, has a lot of natural resources, underwent a period of civil war. And then the current president, Joseph Kabila, was supposed to step down at the end of 2016 with elections over the course of 2017. Well, Eylon, it's now 2018 and he's still in power. So a lot of the Congolese are not so excited about this. The Catholic Church, which is very, very powerful in the country, negotiated that agreement over the election. There were protests. On New Year's Eve, on December 31st, a number of protesters were killed. A mass was held at the Catholic Church a few days ago. Tear gas and warning shots were fired. And again, a country whose troubles extend far beyond this.
We want to hear from this troubled country?
We do. And actually, let's listen to what one of the, again, a few days ago at this mass at this church, again, mourning the deaths and the killings of those 7 protesters. Let's listen to what a mourner had to say.
It's just not normal what is going on in our country. And what we are saying, all the mediocrities have to get out, and we have good reasons. Is it normal that people can't even get out of church? We came to pray. We are not there to do politics. We are here to condemn wrongdoing. And what is going on in our country?
Owen, let's look at this from a press angle. Why is it that stories in Africa, major violence of the type you're describing, are so completely overlooked by the world press?
Well, Eylon, a few reasons, I think. Number one, historically, this is a continent that's been so troubled that problems and instability in many of these countries simply looks like the old journalistic axiom of a dog biting a man. It's not something out of the ordinary. Now, we should say, over the past few years, Africa has turned the corner, I think, to a large degree in its press coverage, saying that there are a lot of success stories, but this shows that there's still a lot of problems out there.
Okay, Owen Altelman, thank you very much for those headlines. We're taking a short break. When we come back, Kalev Ben-David, host of The Rundown, will be here to put a fresh spin on some of his favorite stories from the week. We'll be back with the Spin Room in just a minute.
I'm Lauren Izzo on I-24 News. Join me on High Definition right here for an in-depth understanding of Israel's diverse society through groundbreaking documentaries.
Join Lauren Izzo weeknights at 10:03 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
Fearless, timely, and always engaging. Every night, David Schuster brings the news from around the world to your front door. Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to the Spin Room. For our final segment, we have the host of The Rundown, Kalev Ben-David, here to put a fresh spin on some of his favorite stories. Kalev, welcome to the Spin Room.
Pleasure to be here alone.
Kalev, for better or worse, I-24 News didn't win any of President Trump's fake news awards, did it?
No, it did not, and that, of course, would be nice publicity either way. I should note that, of course, most of the awards were won by the New York Times.
Failing New
York Times, but has actually been improving since President Trump took office. And then CNN, of course, his favorite target. We should also note that most of those awards were given on stories which were mistakes made and which those outlets themselves corrected over the course of the year. And of course, the 11th award went to what he called the fake Russian collusion story, though not actually he didn't cite any specific story relating to the Robert Mueller investigation. But I want to just call attention to a fake news story yesterday that President Trump corrected that didn't make those news awards. We had our own Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in India, apparently telling reporters that he believed that, or he had indications that the United States would begin to move its embassy, would begin steps to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem within the space of a year, meaning not building it obviously from scratch, but probably some temporary quarters. And President Trump asked about this, actually corrected that claim and saying that no, it's not going to be happening that
so
quickly.
Ironically here we had Prime Minister Netanyahu doing a Trump, so to speak, and making stuff up.
Indeed. Well, I don't know if he was making stuff up, but of course Prime Minister Netanyahu has himself adopted this mantra of fake news from President Trump. We've heard it over the course of the years, and here was a case of some fake news from the Prime Minister, which President Trump corrected, but it didn't make it.
Which, I mean, really,
his list.
fake news, refers to the really fake stories that are being pumped out to these troll farms by Russia. But Trump is using fake news to refer to, one, possibly inaccurate stories, and two, critical stories, right?
Well, certainly critical stories. And yes, actually, these were mistakes within the context of the stories. There were some, though, that were clearly inaccurate. But no, nothing that seemed to have been manufactured from whole cloth, as you say.
Okay, Kalev, our next subject. We understand that our northern neighbor Lebanon has banned the latest Steven Spielberg movie, The Post.
No, they have actually, let me update you, they've unbanned the latest Steven Spielberg movie,
What a U-turn. Well, credit where credit is due.
Well, let's give credit to the person. Apparently, the censorship board of Lebanon did, in fact, ban the movie The Post, which is about the Washington Post publishing the Pentagon Papers during the 1970s. Why would Lebanon ban that particular thing? Well, apparently it's because one scene, the very ending of Steven Spielberg's Schindler's List, was filmed, I believe, over the course of one day in Jerusalem. And apparently that was the reason, yet a lot of people pointed out other Spielberg movies have
Well, Lebanon was also
played since
upset
then.
that Spielberg donated $1 million from his foundation to Israel.
Yes, that's another thing they cited. But as we said, it was undone. And let's give credit. Apparently, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, Said Hariri himself, overruled the censorship board and decided to allow it. It's very interesting that what they didn't, for example, cite Munich, the Spielberg movie, which is about the Israeli operation to target the blacks. It was only that one day of filming all those years ago for Schindler's List in Jerusalem.
Interesting fact, Kalev. Do you know which other two movies Lebanon banned last year?
Well, they banned Wonder Woman, of course,
Gal Gadot being Israeli.
And they filmed, I believe, The Insult.
They also banned the movie with Daniel Radcliffe that was based on the memoirs of an Israeli backpacker.
Yossi Ginsburg, I think that's right.
How petty. Okay, Kalev, third story in the south of Israel. Camels are a bit of a nuisance. What's happening there?
Right. I don't like to use this platform alone to advocate a personal agenda, but I have two children that are presently living in the south. And driving in, you could see these signs all over the Negev.
Beware of camels near the road.
Right. And apparently there is a law now to try, because it's a real danger.
A bit.
There is a real danger. At night, those roads are not lit, and we have had serious accidents on the road of drivers driving into camels crossing the road in the Negev. And this law in the Knesset...
it sounds comic, but it's not.
It's a serious business. They want to put chips in these camels so that they could be tracked, and apparently the owners don't want to do it. In fact, apparently some of the owners, they put a ring in, and then after there's an accident, they run over there and they cut the ear of the camels. They cut off the ears of the camel so that they can't be, for example, sued for negligence for allowing their camels to stray. So apparently this law has been delayed to register camels, a potentially deadly weapon. I drive down in the south late at night now, so I'm going to urge our parliament to get its act together, to start marking those camels, and to help prevent. Seriously, we've had fatal accidents down there because of these camels.
Absolutely. Like a camel in the headlights is probably how we should adapt the idiom for Israel. Kalev Ben-David, thank you very much for joining us to share with us those stories.
Pleasure.
And that brings us to the end of today's edition of The Spin Room. We'll be back next week with more. As always, do follow more from us at i24 News online on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm Eylon Levy. It's been a pleasure.